The CIA once overthrew the elected government of Iran. They called it Operation Ajax, and for 60 years they denied it. Then they wrote the truth down in their own file. The coup, one internal history says, was carried out under CIA direction as an act of US foreign policy, conceived and approved at the highest levels of government. It cost about $1 million. It took less than a week, and it worked so well that they did it again. In Guatemala, in Chile, in a dozen countries you've heard of, and a few you haven't. But this was the first. This is the one that taught them how. And 26 years later, it will come back to burn them in a way no one in that room ever imagined. To understand it, you have to start with the oil. For decades, Iran's oil was not really Iran's. It belonged to a British company, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, the firm that would one day become BP. They pumped it, they sold it, they kept the book, and in some years they handed Iran as little as 16% of the profits. The company town at Abadan told the whole story. It held the largest oil refinery on earth, and inside it, British engineers lived in air-conditioned villas with swimming pools, while the Iranians who did the work lived in a slum. The workers called Paper City, with no running water and no electricity. It was their oil, on their land, and they were the poorest people standing on it. Iran asked for a fairer deal, a 50-50 split, the same terms other countries were starting to get. Britain said no. So Iran did something no country in the region had dared. In 1951, its parliament voted, almost unanimously, to take the oil back, to nationalise it. The man who led that fight became Prime Minister. His name was Mohammad Mossadegh, a lawyer, an aristocrat, a nationalist who wept in Parliament and meant it. Time magazine made him its Man of the Year. To Iranians, he was the man who finally stood up to the empire. To London, he was a thief. And Britain decided that no country would be allowed to take back what an Englishman had drilled. Britain's first move wasn't a coup, it was strangulation. The Royal Navy blockaded Iran's ports, and Britain organised a global boycott of Iranian oil. No one would buy it, no one would ship it. Iran was sitting on a lake of oil it couldn't sell, and its economy began to bleed. But strangling Mossadegh only made him a hero at home, so Britain went to Washington with a different pitch. They stopped talking about oil. They started talking about communism, telling the Americans that Mossadegh was weak, unstable, and about to let Iran fall to the Soviet Union. It wasn't really true. Mossadegh was a nationalist, not a communist, and he distrusted the Soviets as much as the British. But it was 1953, and in Washington the word Soviet opened every door. Winston Churchill wanted it, Dwight Eisenhower approved it, and the job of erasing a democracy landed on the desk of the CIA. The man they sent to Tehran was a grandson of a president. Kermit Roosevelt Jr., grandson of Theodore Roosevelt, slipped into Iran to run an operation the CIA code named TPAJX. He had a budget, $1 million, approved by CIA Director Allen Dulles, to be used, in the agency's words, in any way that would bring about the fall of Mossadegh. He wasn't working alone. Britain's spies handed him a ready-made machine, the Rashidian brothers, who for years had been quietly paying newspaper editors, politicians, clerics and army officers all over Tehran. And here is what $1 million bought. It bought newspapers. Editors paid to print that Mossadegh was a communist, a Jew, a secret British agent, anything that would stick. It paid for propaganda so cynical the CIA later admitted to it. Agents posing as communists would threaten Muslim clerics and even bomb the home of a cleric, so that Iranians would blame Mossadegh and fear the godless left he supposedly protected. It bought politicians and army officers, and it bought crowds, street gangs, led by a South Tehran strongman nicknamed Brainless, paid to riot on command. In a strange twist, they even paid gangs to riot pretending to be communists, and other gangs to attack them. A fake civil war, staged for the price of a bribe. The plan needed one more thing, a signature. 2 royal decrees, one firing Mossadegh, one appointing the CIA's chosen general, Fazlullah Zahedi, in his place. A retired American general, The father of the man who would one day run the Gulf War was flown in secretly just to help pressure the king. But the young Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, was terrified. He knew that if the coup failed, those signatures were his death warrant. The CIA pushed. His own sister pushed. An American general flew in to lean on him. Finally, he signed, and then he had a plane fueled and waiting, just in case. The night of August the 15th, 1953, the coup began. A colonel named Nassiri drove to Mossadegh's house to deliver the decree and arrest him. But Mossadegh had been warned. The soldiers loyal to him were ready, and when Nassiri arrived to make his arrest, he was the one arrested. The plot was blown. By morning, Tehran radio was announcing that a coup against the government had failed. And the Shah did exactly what he prepared to do. He ran, first to Baghdad, then to a hotel in Rome, telling reporters he might never return. In Washington, they thought it was over. The cables ordered Roosevelt to leave Iran before he was caught. He didn't leave. He looked at a blown operation, a fled king, and a city that thought it had won, and he decided to try again in 3 days with nothing but cash and nerve. What Roosevelt did next, the CIA's own history calls a concentrated, improvised psychological warfare campaign. He had the 2 signed decrees, so he leaked them, proof, he said, that Mossadegh was the real usurper, defying his lawful king, and he put his money on the street. On the morning of August 19th, the paid crowds came out, and this time, real royalists came with them. Gangs, soldiers, and clerics, all pouring toward the centre of the city, all shouting for the Shah. Because this is the uncomfortable part. The CIA didn't invent Iran's divisions, it paid into them. Powerful clergy who had once backed Mossadegh had turned against him, and their break handed the street to the Shah at exactly the moment the coup needed it. Roosevelt lit the fire, but it took Iranian hands to carry it. The crowd seized the radio station and put a voice on the air announcing the government had fallen, and to a country with no other news, that announcement helped make it true. By afternoon, it was a battle. Pro-coup tanks rolled on Mossadegh's home, and the fight for the house alone went on for hours. By the end of the day, an estimated 200 to 300 people had been killed in the streets of Tehran. By nightfall, it was done. Mossadegh's house was overrun and looted. He escaped over a garden wall and surrendered the next day. Zahedi was installed as Prime Minister, and the Shah flew home from Rome to a staged hero's welcome. Within 2 days, the CIA quietly gave $5 million to his new government. The democracy was gone, and the oil, the thing this was always really about, went back to the West. A new consortium of Western companies took over Iran's oil, and for the first time, American firms got a 40% share of the country Britain had fought to keep. Kermit Roosevelt had toppled a government for about $1 million. One historian would later call it the biggest bargain the CIA ever got. Mossadegh was put on trial by the men who overthrew him. He got 3 years in prison, then house arrest for the rest of his life, and he died, still a prisoner in his own country, in 1967. He never took back a word of it. To the end, he insisted the oil had belonged to Iran, and history has mostly agreed with him, not the men who removed him. And the Shah, the frightened young king who had kept a plane fueled, came back a different man. He ruled for 26 more years as an American ally, his throne guarded by a secret police called SAVAK, famous, by the end, for its torturers. Washington had what it wanted, a friendly Iran, sitting on an ocean of oil. For a while, it looked like the perfect operation. And then the bill came due. In 1979, resentment that had been building since 1953 exploded. The Shah was overthrown, and the country that America had installed him to rule turned into its bitterest enemy. Students stormed the American embassy and held 52 people hostage for 444 days. There's a word intelligence officers use for this. For the moment a covert operation comes back to hit the country that launched it. They call it blowback, and 1953 is one of the reasons the word exists. The CIA had spent $1 million to stop Iran from slipping out of the West's hands, and in the end they didn't prevent that future. They created it. 60 years later, they finally admitted, in their own words, what they... The file is public now. You can read it yourself.